I'll try not to be emotional about this, but I've heard Anthony Fauci a couple of times now say that he represents science. I know what he means by that. He means in the political bickering, all that kind of stuff, that for a lot of people, he represents science. But words matter. And this isn't just clips. I mean, maybe I'm distinctly aware of that doing this podcast. Like, yeah, I talk for like hundreds of hours now, maybe over 1,000 hours. But like, I'm still careful with the words. Like, I'm trying not to be an asshole, and I'm aware when I'm an asshole, and I'll apologize for it. Like, if the words "I represent science" left my mouth, which they very well could, I would sure as hell be apologizing for it, and not in a because I got in trouble. I would just feel bad about saying something like that. And even that little phrase, "I represent science." No, Dr. Fauci, you do not represent science. I love science. The millions of scientists that inspired me to get into it, to fall in love with the scientific method in the exploration of ideas through the rigor of science. That Anthony Fauci does not represent. He's one, I believe, great scientist of millions. He does not represent anybody. He's just one scientist. And I think the greatness of a scientist is best exemplified in humility, because the scientific method basically says, like, you're like standing before the fog, the mystery of it all, and like slowly chipping away at the mystery. And it's like it's embarrassing, it's humiliating how little you know. That's the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the great scientists have to have humility, to me, and especially in their communication, they have to have humility. And I mean, I don't know, and some of it is also words matter, because you have to, like, great leaders have to have the poetry of action. They have to be bold and inspire action across millions of people. But you also have to, through that poetry of words, express the complexity of the uncertainty you're operating under. Be humble in the face of not being able to predict the future or understand the past or really know what's the right thing to do, but we have to do something. And through that, you have to be a great leader that inspires action. And some of that is just words, and he chose words poorly. I'm all torn about this. And then there's politicians that are taking those words and magnifying them and playing games with them. And of course, that's a disincentive for the people who do, the scientific leaders that step into the limelight, to say any more words. So they kind of become more conservative with the words they use. I mean, it just becomes a giant mess. But I think the solution is to ignore all of that and to be transparent, to be honest, to be vulnerable, and to express the full uncertainty of what you're operating under, to present all the possible actions, and to be honest about the mistakes that are made in the past. I mean, there's something, even if you're not directly responsible for those mistakes, taking responsibility for them is a way to win people over. Like, I don't think leaders realize this often in the modern age, in the internet age. They can see through your bullshit. And it's really inspiring when you take ownership. So to do the thought experiment, like in public, do a thought experiment. If there was a lab leak, and then lay out all the funding, the EcoHealth Alliance, all the incredible science going on at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the NIH. Lay out all the possible ethical problems. Lay out all the possible mistakes that could have been made, and say, like, this could have happened, and if this happened, here's the best way to respond to it and to prevent it in the future. And just lay all that complexity out. I mean, I wish we would have seen that, and I have hope that this conversations like it, your work, and books on this topic will inspire young people today when they become in the Anthony Fauci's role to be much more transparent and much more humble and all of those kinds of things. That this is just a relic of the past. When there's a person, no offense to me, in a suit that has to stand up and speak with clarity and certainty. I mean, that's just a relic of the past. Is my hope. But
do you mind if I
yes,
because I agree with a great deal of what you said, and it's really unfortunate that certainly the Chinese government, as I said before, our government wasn't as transparent as I feel they should have been, particularly in the early days of the pandemic, and particularly with regard to the issue of pandemic origins. I mean, we know that Dr. Fauci was on calls with people like Christian Anderson at Scripps and others in those early days, raising questions. Is this an engineered virus? There were a lot of questions. And it's kind of sad. I mean, as I mentioned before, I've been one. I mean, and certainly there were others, but there weren't a lot of us of the people who, from the earliest days of the pandemic, were raising questions about, hey, not so fast here. And I launched my website on pandemic origins in April of last year, April 2020. It got a huge amount of attention. And actually, my friend Matt Pottinger, who is the Deputy National Security Advisor, when he was reaching out to people in the U.S. government and in allied governments saying, hey, we should look into this, what he was sending them was my website. It wasn't some U.S. government information. And so,
by the way, people should still go to the website. You keep updating it, and it's an incredible resource.
Well, thank you, JamieMetzl.com. And it's really unfortunate that our governments and international institutions, for pretty much all of 2020, weren't doing their jobs of really probing this issue. People were hiding behind this kind of false consensus, and I'm critical of many people. Even when I heard Francis Collins' interview with you, I just felt, well, he wasn't as balanced on the issue of COVID origins. Certainly, Dr. Fauci could have, in his conversation with Rand Paul, it wasn't even a conversation, but in some process in the aftermath, could have laid things out a bit better. He did say, and Francis Collins did say, that we don't know the origins, and that was a shift, and we need to have an investigation. So now, but having said all of that, I do kind of, I have tremendous respect for Dr. Fauci, for the work that he's done on HIV/AIDS. I mean, I have been vaccinated with the Moderna vaccine. Dr. Fauci was a big part of the story of getting us these vaccines that have saved millions and millions of lives. And so I don't think, there's a lot to this story. And then the second thing is it's really hard to be a public health expert because your mission is public health. And you have to, if you are leading with all of your uncertainty, it's a really hard way to do things. And so, like, even now, like if I go to CVS and I get a Tylenol, somebody has done a calculation of how many people will die from taking Tylenol, and they say, well, all right, we can live with that. And that's why we have regulation. And so all of us are doing kind of summaries. And then we have people in public health who are saying, well, all right, we've summed it all up and you should do X. You should get your kids vaccinated for measles. You should not drive your car at 100 miles an hour. You should don't drink lighter fluid, whatever these things are. And we want them to kind of give us broad guidelines. And yet now our information world is so fragmented that if you're not being honest about something material, someone's going to find out and it's going to undermine your credibility. And so I agree with you that there's a greater requirement for transparency now. Maybe there always has been, but there's an even greater requirement for it now because people want to trust that you're speaking honestly and that you're saying, well, here's what I know. And this is based on what I know. Here are the conclusions that I draw. But if it's just, and again, I don't think the words "I'm science" or whatever it was are the right words. But if it's just, trust me because of who I am, I don't think that flies anywhere anymore.